There he is.
Yo, yo, what's
Dude,
up,
what is going on? How are you
dude?
doing?
I'm good, man. I am doing good. I see you got Fathom Note Taker in here.
Yes. Have you ever used it before?
No, we use a. I'm sure you heard of Gong if you were looking at a Fathom. We
Yeah.
we use Gong at work. It's phenomenal. But my sales coach Ian Koniak uses Fathom. He literally just onboarded this thing. I don't know how companies and like DocuSign don't use a note taker app. It's insane to
Oh
me.
my God. Yeah. Like I started using it when it was a free tool. And because I was spending so much time on one-on-one calls, like actually I would take paper notes
Yeah, I
and then I would
remember.
transcribe them after. I'm like, this is good for me to remember. But then I started using this thing and it just saved me so much time.
It's unbelievable.
I was a raving fan of the product instantly.
And I'm
So
sure like it's probably similar characteristics of Gong. Like it can do recaps and AI
yeah.
embedded. It's insane, dude. Yeah, it's
So
crazy.
even from like a sales perspective, if I have like a sales call, like I'll use the notes from like Fathom. And then what
Mhm.
I've done is I've even like as I'm creating ads, I'll take like the notes from the sales call for like words that the prospect used and like use that in my ads and in my
Yeah,
content. So it's like super, super cool.
it's your
Um,
own. It's your own assistant.
well, I definitely want to hear all about Dan, but here's kind of what I'm thinking is
Yeah,
like for this testimonial, I don't know if you looked at any of the questions that I sent over, but
yeah, I
it's
did.
going
I
to be
got some answers written down.
okay, cool. So
Yeah.
we'll keep it like pretty casual, pretty short. And kind of what I'm thinking is maybe we save like at least the detail of the Dan stuff for the podcast. Like you can definitely mention it, but at least for me, like hearing all about it. What do you think about like obviously you
No,
can
I
talk about it as like a big win, but in terms of like really exploring that and like taking away all the lessons and stuff, what do you think about kind of keeping that for the podcast?
I think we keep that for the podcast and on a separate time. And I say that we
Yeah.
just knock out the testimony for today.
Yeah.
I got like these 20 minutes here and then I got to jam back to work. So it's like,
Okay.
but I wanted to come on and make sure that we could jam this out, get this done, and then and so that you can have this. And then next
Yeah.
week for the podcast, right? We can even circle up offline, talk about it in the podcast and actually get into it. So, but yeah,
Okay.
like I got things I went in and reviewed your questions, wrote some things down, so I feel good to go for the testimony.
Awesome. Are you ready to just rip it? You ready to do this
Yeah,
thing?
man, let's just go for it. Well, first
Awesome.
off, also good to see you, man. Really good to
I
see you.
know. I'm so pumped to just like kind of connect with you and hang out with you again. And
Yeah,
I meant what I said about you should let me know when you're in Minnesota next because
it
I
was literally
think
what I was just thinking about. We will be there sometime during the summertime, so I think like probably July. I think we will
okay,
be there again and go out
yeah,
on Lake Minnetonka or something. Like we got some
really okay,
Yeah, just for some work stuff. So, but yeah, dude, I told Shelby about that. She was excited to hear that. I would love that would be awesome.
okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm pumped about that. So yeah, if you're cool with it, we can just dive right in and I'll just kind of welcome you and we'll get right into it.
let's do it.
Awesome. Colin, thanks for jumping on, man.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Mario.
All right. So we were talking about this before, but basically the goal for today is just to hear a little bit about your story through the coaching process in the
Yep.
hopes that, you can kind of share some things that might help somebody who's watching this. And so as we're kind of kicking it off, could you just tell me a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and what things were like before you started the coaching process?
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Mario. And it's really good to see you. My name is Colin Walters. For those listening, I'm from the greater Seattle, Washington area. And by day, I work in software sales for a full time gig. And then I do have an entrepreneurial spirit. So, doing all sorts of content creation. I run a podcast, write a newsletter, always doing some content stuff and connecting with humans. I do some Airbnb and coaching gigs on the side. And then I have an amazing fiance, Shelby. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a friend, and that's just a little bit about who I am. And then how you and I got connected, Mario, is I was reaching out for quality individuals to come onto my podcast. I
Yep.
found you on social media. I think it was when you had interviewed Matt Choi. And
Yep.
so I thought that you had a lot of common interests with me in the endurance world, in the content creation, podcasting, coaching, and mindset world. I reached out to you, and then you came on my podcast, and I learned about your coaching business from that, and it was like a match made in heaven. So, and then that's how we got connected.
It really was, because I just remember like so many similarities between being like growth mindset, entrepreneurial, endurance, and really just like this worldview of like trying to get the most out of life and enjoy it and document and share all of the lessons. So I've just loved, getting to know you and working with you, man. And so take me back to like that time before you started coaching. What were some of the things that you were either struggling with or just trying to get a little bit more clarity or help with?
Yeah, I think a couple of those things for me was number one, clarity of vision. Right?
Yeah.
I think that was like the first thing that you and I ever talked about was I was really struggling to find clarity of vision, and I didn't need it to be for my entire life, but at least with where I wanted to go in some of my entrepreneurial journeys and my work life, my career, professionalism, and some personal things. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. And that was one of the first things that we started working on in like the first week or two. We were already doing some writing out where I wanted my life to go from a vision casting standpoint. So that was the first thing that comes to mind. And then just consistent execution of deliverables and action items
Yeah.
when it came to the podcast, when it came to the content creation, when it came to doing the coaching like I was thinking about doing or thinking about starting. And so, if I could sum it up, it'd be vision and purpose and then execution of the things that I was wanting to do in pursuit of my goals that I wasn't executing at the level that I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I remember that was like one of the big things is like setting a long term vision for what you wanted your life to look like with the business, with all of the entrepreneurial endeavors. And so, what were some of the exercises or some of the most beneficial things for you throughout that coaching process as we started kind of diving in?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we did was actually do work. So I think that immediately getting into the work, and right, it's one thing to
Yep.
sign up and get started with coaching. It's another thing to have an action item to do immediately, right? I think there
Yeah.
was a less than a week turnaround. There was like a couple days or something like that, and to where I actually had to have something produced, and so that required me to become a better version of myself in a matter of 2 days to actually sit down, plan out when I was going to write out this vision and the start of it. And so that took me scheduling time I remember it was like a 5:30 a.m. time block before my workday got started that I actually sat down to write that thing and get into the work. And
Yeah.
so actually doing things immediately without waiting for the perfect time was like
Mm.
that's like the first thing that comes to my mind. And then having weekly accountability systems. I think that with anybody that does coaching,
Yeah.
anybody will know that like having that person that you are committed to and committed to following through with the action items that you said you were going to do, that's huge in itself. It's one thing to, tell ourselves and hold ourselves accountable. It's an entirely different ballgame when you are working with a professional coach who is there to help you navigate the journey, but also hold you accountable to producing, the work that you are setting out to do. And so, that the accountability that created weekly executions, but then also the systems that we walk through, right? Calendaring, time blocking, scheduling, habits, mindset, like all the things that are required to actually not only produce consistent work, but produce quality consistent work. So those are some of the things I would say, like literally just action, right? And being able to do
Yeah.
that consistently over time.
Well, I think you've like touched on like a lot of it because like it does start with like the vision and understanding like where are you going.
Where are you
And then
going?
what we would
For
do
sure.
is like you work backwards from that and develop a
That's right.
system on a weekly and a daily basis to then, execute on that and make that execution a lot easier. And
That's
then
right.
the accountability adds like a little bit of like healthy tension and just like support, right? Like having having that timeline to follow through on it. So that's really cool to hear that some of those things were helpful. And I know there were a couple of like big things that came out of that, but what were some of the results or the things like as you're looking back on the process that you're the most proud of?
Yeah, and even super quickly before I mention some of those, another thing I'm thinking about is you were very flexible
Mm,
in my navigation of what I
y-
was wanting because like to your point, step one was to actually take a step back and think and strategize about the vision and where I
yeah,
wanted to go and what I wanted to pursue, make decisions, right? Which you helped me through. But then things changed as we went
yeah,
along, right? And so I think that one of your strengths was being able to adapt and be super
mm,
flexible to my needs and my desires as those continued to develop in different ways, right? It was like we have the North Star, but it wasn't like a linear path to get there. And so we were
I'm so
in,
glad you mentioned that because
yeah,
it's so true. Like
true.
you don't just like come up with like a vision or an end state and it just is like exactly the path is like immediately clear to that.
Mhm.
A lot of times you almost treat it like an experiment,
Right.
right? This is where I want to go. This is the end destination. Let's try a few of these different options. Let's get some data and then let's reflect and let's adjust our path based off of that. And I think that is also like a strength of yours is like taking action, but then reflecting on it and using that to figure out like where to go next.
It was very strategic how you laid it out. And it also, like to your point about experimenting, you gave me as a client permission to experiment. And that was
Yeah.
something where if I'm just going on my own, I'm not knowing if this is what I should or should not be doing, but you gave me confidence in being able to experiment, to try different things, and to know that the podcast was something I wanted to pursue and continue going after. Right. I had that moment where I was like, do I want to go all in on the podcast? I want to go all in on the YouTube, or is there
Yep.
something else? And you helped me really think through, not tell me what to do, but you helped me think through your lines of questioning and
Mm.
through some suggestions, but allowed me to get to um, my own conclusion that I felt confident in and moving forward with the podcast at full force. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on that as it was top of mind. And then for actual results,
Yeah.
where do I even begin? So I would say the first one that comes to mind is landing my number one ideal dream guest to come onto the podcast.
Let's
And
go.
that was like the most instrumental achievement that I've had in my content creation and podcasting journey. And that was to bring on Dan Martell onto the podcast. And so actually just last week, the dream came true. I drove from Seattle to Kelowna, Canada to go and interview Dan Martell in his own Martell Media studio in Kelowna, Canada. Interviewed him, met the man, and now we're in the process of actually getting this podcast published and so then out for the world to hear it. So that's like the first thing. And that back to what the work we did is you and I sat down and we actually crafted out what do we want this dream guest list to be and why. And he was at the top. And so that's like the first thing that comes to mind is, it's so relevant. And in order to actually have that opportunity, Dan challenged me to get to 100 episodes. And so when you and I first started working together, I think I had like 8 episodes or nine
Yep.
episodes on the podcast, and here we are at 103 as of last night. So
That is
we hit the
so
century mark. Yep.
like I've just been so pumped for you because I remember you kind of setting these goals earlier on and then to set the goal, set the
Mhm.
vision and put the work in for a year, right? To consistently do that and then follow up with him, land it, and just can't wait to hear the interview. Honestly, I think it's just such a cool story for you, and can't wait to hear more about like what you've learned through that process.
I'm excited to share that, and we'll save that for when we do our podcast together here next
Yeah,
week. But yeah, but it was a journey to get there, and it was through a lot of actionable steps that were strategically thought out that you and I worked on, and decision making is something that I value stepping out of the coaching that we did together, being able to ask the right questions, and so bringing Dan Martell onto the podcast, hitting 100 episodes. We're at 103 currently. and
Yeah.
then getting my first client from a coaching standpoint where I do some of my own life coaching and personal and professional development coaching. And he's renewed with me 3 times. And
Oh my
so that took,
gosh.
yeah, we're still working together. And, we have our weekly sync. So shout out my man, Big Tone, Anthony
Tone.
Lundberg. Yep, big tone, baby. So, but that was another testament to you and I walking through how I was going to go about that. And without you and I actually doing the coaching, like, yeah, it took me to do the work. Would these things have actually happened? I don't know. And I'm not willing to risk the bet whether it would or would not have, should we not have worked together. So I'm just like super grateful for everything that we did and the coaching client relationship that you and I have and did have. And so yeah, man, those are like some of the big three: dream guest for the podcast, 100 plus episodes, and 3-time renewing customer who we are still working together in pursuit of our next renewal.
That's so cool, man. Like
Yep.
honestly, it's so cool to hear that you're still working with him. And I think one of the things, like tying it back to what you actually learned through the coaching,
Hmm.
is the tools, like setting the vision, having the weekly cadence, following through. And those are the things, like once you have those tools and you keep using them, that's where like the possibilities are really limitless. And I think that's the coolest part is like you have those tools that you can teach your clients, and then you can continue to use yourself to set your next dream client and your next podcast guest. So so cool, man. So cool to hear that.
Yeah,
Is there
man. And
anything?
just to, yeah, I just want to tap into that a little bit more because, along with the actual tools and like you helped me develop a framework and a system to build off of, right? Like
Mm,
it's not identical to what you do, but it was the foundation and the structure that allowed me to start somewhere
yeah,
and then build my own thing from there and build our own thing from there. And so, there's intangibles that come with that, like being able to automate some of the process and basically just systemize it in my own ways. A whole bunch of confidence, honestly, is something that I walked away with and continue to walk away with from the work that we did and the results that were produced. And, just like a newfound self respect for the things that I did, right? Regardless of results, but the entire process that it took to get to where we are. A year and a half later, like it took work and it took hard moments and it took learning opportunities and not seeing failure as failure, but only as that learning opportunity. And I'll never forget the day when I was working through some professional struggles with some clients and I had a really upset customer and you asked me, how could this actually be a good thing? And that question right there, I've applied to relationships. I've applied to my work life. I've applied to my personal life, to setbacks, to injuries when I'm training for races. It's like that question alone was worth the value because it forces you to think differently about what we perceive to be an inopportune situation when in reality it can be an opportunity, deciding that we look at it that way. So,
that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with me. I
yeah.
remember that one because
Thank you for sharing it with me.
didn't you call up
I
that
did.
prospect and then get
Yep.
him on your side, and then they ended up like signing up
We
with
closed the deal. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
that is so that's so cool. But it's like it really does change the way that you perceive adversity when you believe that things are happening for you and that you can learn and grow through every situation. So
Mhm.
going forward, like believing that thought, whatever comes up, how can this actually be a good thing? What can I learn from this? How does this
That's
make me
right.
better? Changes everything. So that is so cool, man. I can't wait to like just see you continue to just do your thing with Seeds of Success, with your business, with your content. And thank you for coming on it and sharing your story. One thing I did want to ask: is there any advice that you would give to somebody else who's maybe listening to this? They're thinking about getting help or getting a coach. Any advice for somebody who's kind of in the earlier stages?
Yeah, it's there. I do have advice because I was sitting in those shoes of, do I do it or do I not do it? Do I invest the money? Do I not invest the money? And quite honestly, the you know I have started to look at investments differently. I've invested in real estate. I've I've invested in stocks, in the market, in my 401k, and all this. The number one greatest return on investment that I've ever received is the investment in myself, in my own personal development. And if we're talking, the intangibles, if we're talking financials, like there is no greater return per dollar than you're going to get on investing in yourself. And while I can't guarantee what your results are going to be, what I can guarantee you is that after working with a coach, somebody like Mario, you will undoubtedly be in a much better position than you were 6 months, 12 months, 18 months prior to then, when you were thinking about it. And so if I could just, offer that little piece of perspective and, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is right in this very moment. And so those are the things that come to my mind. And I just, hope that individuals can, find it within themselves to invest in themselves
Mm-hmm.
and invest in these, you know, this a program that is going to better their lives to ultimately then better the lives of all of those around them and who they can touch and serve. So yeah, man, that's my 2 cents on
Such a
thinking about coaching.
such a good thought because so many business owners, entrepreneurs, high achievers are so good at getting to a certain point, like by themselves.
Hmm.
But you don't want to go it alone because you're not going to get where you want to be without like the help of a team, around you or a coach. And so I
It
love
also
that.
doesn't make sense. Like
It's
if you
not
think about it,
enjoyable.
why go through the failures and the struggles where you don't have to? Like, yes, I fully agree that failures and lessons, like they are very necessary for growth and allowing us to to progress. But it's also like, why would we not want to expedite our results from working with people who have been in the shoes of where we're trying to go? It's like
Yeah.
the path is right there, right? And then in working with you, that's opened up my eyes to, which was, to be fair, which was scary for me, right? I
Yep.
had never made an investment like that in myself. And so to take my own hard-earned money and invest it, like hand it over and say, okay, let's get to work. Right. It was a big moment for me, but it was like
Hmm.
that quote that you hear, right? Everything you want is on the other side of fear. And this is exactly what the case was because I worked with you and then, we parted ways for a little bit. And then I hired a more specific sales coach, like who does software sales specifically, because I saw the value in what you and I did
Yeah.
together. And I'm like, I'm going to go apply this to my, very specific career skill sets as well. So I did that and that has expedited results for me. It's just like, man, it just makes so much sense. So for anybody, thinking about it, scared about it, it's like I was in those same shoes and still am. Right. But always,
Absolutely.
always grateful that I did it. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share everything that's worked for you. I've loved working with you, and just can't wait to see what you accomplish next. And for anybody who's listening to this and thinking, you're ready to go to the next level, go ahead and send me a DM or book a call down below, and would love to have a conversation with you. So, thanks for coming on, Colin.